Meet the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your wife. Guaranteed to have the time of your life, because the Mets are really socking the ball, knocking those home runs over the wall. East side, west side, everybody's coming down to meet the Mets, Mets of New York town. Oh, the butcher and the baker and the people on the streets, where do they go? To meet the Mets.
Second. Apologize, guys. My mic was off. I apologize about that. What's up, Mets fans? Welcome back to another Mets Hot Stove Live right here on both of our channels. We're here with Chris today, 2/4 of the Mets Roundtable podcast. You can find it from CP New York Sports on Twitter and YouTube. And of course, we're going to talk about our Mets. And there is a little bit of news to talk about, but let's say what up to Chris. How you doing, buddy?
Doing well. I was duped there. I thought that was my audio. I was kind of scrambling around. So I'm not in my usual setup, but the hot stove must continue, must provide the content, talk about this team. Even when it's a little quiet, it's never quiet. So I'm looking forward to this. Like Rob said, like and subscribe to both our channels, and let's talk about this team, man.
All right, absolutely. So we got a little over 90 days until opening day. We'll talk about that at the end of the stream, but it is noteworthy considering that one holiday is over, and that is Christmas, and we're getting into the new year, and people are getting antsy, Chris, and people are really concerned about this team. People don't know where the Mets are going here. Some say punting, some say transition, some say rebuilding, some say going for it. Who the hell knows what this team's doing at the moment? But I just found it was about like an hour ago. I just found out, and that's why I changed up the topics on you almost at the end of probably about 20 minutes ago. And I know you sent me a message earlier, and yeah, I didn't even know until very recently that the Mets checked in on or linked to two bullpen arms in their lefties, two guys that had a really good season in Matt Moore and Brent Sutter. And one of the guys Stearns knows very well, and Brett Sutter. So let everybody know what's going on with your channel, what you're going to be doing, Mets related or otherwise, and we'll get into them both arms.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity. Like I said, to always continually be on here. Dropped a podcast episode earlier today about some bullpen patterns we've seen so far under this new regime and David Stearns. Also got into whether us as Mets fans should be tempering our expectations in terms of the Mets' off-season plans for the rest of the off-season as this rolls on. So I got into all those topics on my True Mets Talk podcast. You can find the Interstate Mets Report with Nelson and I as well on Tuesdays and Fridays. We usually go on Fridays during the off-season, and when the season rolls around, we'll go Tuesdays and Fridays. Whole bunch of New York sports on the channel. Been dropping some Knicks content as well. So if you're a Knicks fan, follow basketball, make sure you subscribe to the channel. But yeah, no, I'm excited. Check out all of my True Mets Talk podcast videos, and if you like what you see, if you like what you hear, subscribe. I try to keep things very objective, and I try to keep things also very open-ended so that the viewers can make their own assumptions and come to their own conclusions, right? Because I can sit here and talk until I'm blue in the face and tell you what I think is right and wrong, but not filling people in on what's happening objectively is just something that I'm not going to do. So that's how I look at my channel and my content. So I definitely appreciate it. And shout out everybody in the chat, everybody here supporting the stream, and everyone just wants to talk about this team and see this team get better. So we have one common goal in here, no matter what we think about and how we view 2024, whether it's a punt year, whether it's a bridge year. A lot of different people view the term quote unquote bridge year very differently. So it's not a one size fits all answer, as we all.
Correct. And the interesting thing, I know we're already getting started in the chat already when it comes to transition, rebuilding, and the Mets already told us they're not going after Montgomery and Snell. The Mets didn't say that. I didn't hear Stern say that or Cohen say that. The media said that. And the latest report was Andy Martino was talking about that. And again, we don't know, right? It's just past the holiday. And usually right after Christmas is when things really start to get going, especially how slow it's been. The fact that the New York Mets haven't done anything big, and their biggest signing is basically Luis Severino right now. But the Mets are linked to these two bullpen arms in Matt Moore, who had a 2.56 ERA with three different teams in total: the Angels, the Guardians, and the Marlins. He was traded to Cleveland. Cleveland released him, and then Miami picked him up later in the year. And listen, I wanted Matt Moore a couple of years ago, and both of them are a little bit above the age of 30, 34, and 33 years old. I always loved two lefties in the bullpen that you can trust. I hated the fact that the Mets had one bullpen arm that they can trust in Raley, and it was and if you used them, you used them. And in another big spot, if you had to use them early, you didn't have them late. And I think that was crucial to this Mets bullpen that I thought was excuse me, that was actually important. And they didn't do that. And Chris, I wanted to ask you this. I mean, either one to me would be fine. I know a lot of people heard of Matt Moore more than they heard of Brent Suter, but Brent Suter had a 3.38 ERA in Colorado in 57 games, and he only had 3 home runs given up in Colorado. So I know the humidor and the different types of ways they treat the ball down there, but to only give up 3 home runs in 57 games and have under a 3.5 ERA in Colorado, I don't know. I'm kind of leaning towards Brent Suter, even though I like Matt Moore. What do you think?
Yeah, and they are really similar pitchers. Well, I should put a caveat on similar pitchers, right? They're both lefties, and one pitches to contact, and that is Brent Suter, right? And then the other one pitches for a higher strikeout rate and a higher strikeout percentage, and that's Matt Moore. They both have great off-speed stuff. The bullpen so far and how I've been analyzing it is that David Stern seems to like guys that possess a sweeper slider combo, right? To go along with fastball. And that would be Brent Suter. Matt Moore is more of your curveball changeup, and Brent Suter is more of your fastball changeup slider. So like I said, and like you said, I'd be fine with either one of these guys. Matt Moore had a very impressive season last season, and so did Brent Suter out in Colorado. I don't know if I'd like when we talk about lefties, right? We already have Brooks Raley. Another lefty on the market is Aaron Loop, a guy who didn't have a good season last season. But it comes about the market. Any free agent that the Mets are going to go after, you have to assess what their market is and how many years they're going to want their deal. Like you said, these guys are both above the age of 30, and they're coming off of great seasons. I know Matt Moore is more of the popular option, I would say, by the metric standards. But Brent Suter definitely plays. He's a ground ball type pitcher, and he lets the batters put it into play. He's not going to overwhelm you with his fastball and strike you out. And I really do think that does play well for the New York Mets. But they're both lefties at the end of the day. And we need lefty specialists because Brooks Raley, he was decent last season, but are you really confident in Brooks Raley over the longevity of 162? Because he did falter a little bit too, and he did waver. So I think adding another lefty would be perfect for this bullpen. I just wouldn't know what would happen to Joey Lucchesi. Maybe that's a Joey Lucchesi and Adrian Hauser both sticking to the rotation, and they only add one starter instead of 2. But it's a very tricky situation we're starting to navigate here between the rotation and the bullpen. But both of those names that we have up on the board here, Matt Moore and Brent Suter, definitely play well. I'm assuming they're going to want 2 to 3 year deals. And they're both consistent guys, mind you. They're both consistent, especially Brent Suter. From 2020 until, 2023, the last 3-4 seasons, he's been very consistent. And that's something the Mets have really lacked, especially in the bullpen, is consistency. So to add someone like Brent Suter to the bullpen would be a phenomenal play. It really the name of the game here is about how many years they want. That's really the name of the game. The Mets are not in any sort of business to hand out 4, 5, 6-year deals, at least not this offseason. So if you're expecting that, if you're a viewer at home and you're expecting that for any position group, not just strictly the bullpen, It's not going to happen. I think it's something that we really have to sort of temper our expectations with. And like I said, I talked about that in my podcast episode today. It's difficult. It's tricky because a lot of people are already saying the Mets are playing Moneyball in the bullpen with the additions that we've made so far. And,
That's because people
it's
do
like,
their homework.
yeah, you could just never win. You know what I mean? It's just you can never win. So that's how I rest my case right there.
Yeah, and here's the problem that I don't think people do their homework. Like everybody wanted Stearns, yet they don't know what the guy does. And just because he's in a bigger market and has more resources doesn't mean things that he hasn't done in the past doesn't work. If he can save money on the bullpen, and say if he spends minus Diaz, say if he spends around $10 to $15 million in total, or $20 million on the bullpen, and the bullpen has been good, and it has been within his career with the Brewers, why spend money if you don't have to spend money on the bullpen? Like nobody, who knows if it's going to work? If he signs Brent Suter, or Matt Moore, and that's basically the biggest arm he actually puts in that bullpen along with Diaz, and you still have Raley. For all we know, we're thinking it's bad because they're not known names yet. He's done this his entire career with the Brewers, and that was because he didn't have resources, and he had to use his smarts and his analytics team and everything else that he likes to use to put a good bullpen together. And again, I keep on bringing this up. The Yankees and the Brewers had the two best bullpens in baseball over the last couple of years, yet nobody can name three of those players. And I say this many times, and I repeat myself because it is the same problem that people don't want to listen to. And that's when I have an issue, because people wanted Stearns, and Stearns is doing exactly what he's doing, especially with the bullpen, what he's been doing. And if you could save money on the bullpen, not just this year, I'm talking about 2025 as well. If you could save money on the bullpen, you can use that money in the rotation and the lineup as well. If the Mets finish up the offseason and they sign Lucas Giolito and they sign, say, Trevor Bauer or an Imanaga, some way of that combination, as we'll get into our next couple of topics here. Say if they do that, they out of the five, they sign two, and they add a Matt Moore to the bullpen or a Brent Suter, and use the guys that they currently have. They already got Raley, Diaz, Jorge Lopez, that I think a lot of people are souring on. He had a bad year last year, but only 2 years ago he was a closer, and he was very good. So, and we all know that bullpen is fickle. Bullpens can be terrible one year and could be really good the next year. Look at the Phillies. The Phillies had a almost historical bad bullpen in 2022, and they went into the World Series. This year, they had a better bullpen, and they were very similar names. So the fact of the matter is, unlike Joel here, who wants every great player known to man on the Mets and wants an all-star in every position, and I am bringing you out there because you always think that it's not the best, it has to be the best player or it's not worth it at all. You want Snell, you want Montgomery, you want Ohtani, and you also want Yamamoto, and then we're talking, right? That's the problem with a lot of people. And there's a lot of people like Joel, and I am going to call you out because you call me out every single time you're on the chat. And the fact that Bauer is talked about by me, and it should be by others, is because he's probably one of the best options out there at a top-end rotation arm. Because of the fact, and I don't care about off the field. Okay, I said that in my video that I did yesterday. I don't care about off the field. Do I think he's a good guy? No. Do I care what he does in his private life? No. Because we had players that Mets fans rooted for hard, i.e. Jose Reyes, who had domestic issues as well, just like Jerry's Familia. But you know what? When Familia struck out a guy in the ninth inning to win a ball game, when Reyes got a big hit, we cheered him on. We don't care what they do off the field as long as they do what's right on the field and play the game and do something good. That's just the God's honest truth, Chris. And I hate saying that because I wish everybody was model citizens, but it's not true. We all root for football teams here. You're going to tell me not every one of these players are saints on our football teams? Absolutely not. And we still root for them, right? And that's the thing that I have. I appreciate the fact that, we all have morals here and we can't stand whatever Trevor Bauer might have done. But Bauer's name's not going to start coming up big time until these guys come off the board, because he's like a last resort for a lot of teams that miss out. And don't think for a second, if the Mets lose out on like a Lucas Giolito or, an Imanaga, they're probably not going to sign Snell. Maybe they might pivot to Montgomery in like a worst case scenario. But Trevor Bauer is going to be talked about. And we heard he's not a good clubhouse guy. But he was pitching well for the Dodgers before they Major League Baseball suspended him. And he doesn't have to be a good guy in a clubhouse. We always talk about toxic clubhouses, especially with the Mets, Chris. And let's bring up the 5 names: Bauer, Giolito, Snell, Montgomery, Imanaga. If you had a choice between 2 out of the 5, because everybody believes that the Mets should get 2 more starting pitchers. I know you brought up they might just get 1, and maybe they will do that. But what is your thoughts on, say, the first 2 that I put up there, Bauer and Giolito, if the Mets go that route, or would you go another route of those 5?
Like I said, if I had my choice, I've been saying this for so long already, and it's not feasible knowing what we know in terms of how the Mets have gone up until this point this offseason and presumably how they're going to continue this offseason. Guys like a Montgomery, a Snell, and even an Imanaga are not going to be options by default because this organization is not going to give anybody 5 to 7 years. They want to maintain roster and cap flexibility. That's the common theme here. And that is why we're using this term bridge year for 2024, presumably, unless they show us something that, comes out of left field and they go ahead and offer up a multi-year deal. I just don't see it happening for those guys at the bottom. And Yoshinobu Yamamoto was an exception, obviously a 25-year-old phenom. Honestly, one name that's not on here, and he has his own off-the-field issues himself. I don't know the full extent of it, so I can't really talk about that. But Mike Clevenger also had a pretty decent year. I believe a 3.77 ERA, another name to look out for. But honestly, at this point, Lucas Giolito, do I want the guy? I don't want the guy. But if you can offer up a 1-year deal and he accepts it, it's sort of like throwing a dart and seeing what hits. The same thing with Luis Severino. And that's the way the New York Mets decide to go about this offseason, then that's the way they go about it. I can't sit here and say whether it's a good thing or bad thing. That's personally not how I would go about the offseason, but the Mets do need to maintain flexibility. That is a thing. The Mets haven't had cap flexibility over the last couple of seasons. And a lot of people like to say that doesn't matter under Steve Cohen. He's the richest owner in baseball. It does matter. It does matter because honestly, there is a limit. Even for Steve Cohen, there is a limit to how much he's willing to spend. That could be $300 million. That could be $400 million. It doesn't really matter. But there's been no plan with that $400 million cap space or cap hit. There's been no plan with it. And I think that's what we need. We need a plan. So like I said, the discussion of Trevor Bauer is a tricky one. Do I still think he has, things to offer in this league? I do, in terms of stuff. It gets tricky because the Mets have had, like you said, their fair share of off-field issues, not only on the field, right? With those names that you mentioned, but also in the front office more recently. We can go down the list on that because that's a well-known fact. So just for that reason alone, and given the vibe in 2023 that we got, that this clubhouse, something wasn't gelling, right? I think that was the common theme in 2023 when we were doing those in-season streams, that something in this clubhouse just was not gelling. That's why I think they stay away from Trevor Bauer on top of what he comes with in the baggage that he comes with. But is he a talented pitcher? And do I think that someone is going to take a flyer on him in this league? I do. I do fully expect that. I think some team, whether you agree or not, I'm just thinking just purely off of his skill set alone is going to sign him. And I see people talking about Stroman. Stroman's not finding his way back here. Just forget about that.
People want Stroman, but he called the whole entire New York fan base racist. So everybody wants Stroman back, but they don't have Bauer back. You see how silly that is?
Not even the fan base, but the management too, and the front office as well. He called out some people there. So, I said, if I had to just draw it up, I would just go Imanaga. I would give him a 5-year deal, similar to Kodai Senga, and I'd sign Lucas Giolito. But that's obviously not what they're going to do. So if you can bring in a Mike Clevenger and a Lucas Giolito on 1-year deals, and then evaluate those 1-year deals, because you'll have 4 pitchers at that point. You'll have the same, this is what people don't realize. The Mets are going to have to sign pitchers again next season if they go this 1-year deal route. potentially with Giolito coming on board, Quintana coming off the books, and Severino being a free agent, signing that 1-year deal, this whole saga of starting pitching is going to just shape itself up again next offseason when you
Correct.
have Corbin Burns hitting the market. I know it's not feasible, not likely because they'll probably extend him, but Zach Wheeler hitting the market. Some of those older veteran pitchers, but decent options hitting the market in 2025. So like I said, it probably is up to the preference of the New York Mets front office in terms of which pitching class they do prefer. Now, like I said, what have I been saying about this starting pitching in terms of pivot points for Snell and Montgomery? Good pitchers. Snell's a 2-time Cy Young. Montgomery had a great season last season, especially for the Texas Rangers and winning the World Championship. But I just cannot see their talent level and their consistency playing for over the course of 6 to 7 years, especially not at 25, 26, 27, maybe upwards of $30 million AAV.
Yeah.
Not feasible. So, like I said, if it's me, if I had to give you all sound advice in the chat, temper your expectations. And if you came into this offseason already with tempered expectations, more power to you. I was under the assumption that the Mets had a lot of work to do and they were going to be big spenders, just like they were a couple of off seasons ago and even last offseason. But it's just simply not the case. And there are good reasons for it. And we'll see that play out to their advantage over the next year when 2025 hits. But I think the consensus within the fan base right now is impatience. And I understand that as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I understand the impatience, but again, this is the same fan base that was talking to you all season about playing the kids. You can't talk about impatient and then want to play the kids at the same time. And then when people complain about transition years or punting of 2024, yet still complain that the Mets are not making moves and probably will play the kids. And we'll get into that a little later as well. So it's a problem because they want it both ways. You can't play the kids and then bitch about a punting or a transition year of 2024. You can't have it both ways and then complain about the offseason. So which one is it? Which one do you want? Because it can only be one most likely. It's going to be hard to mix in all of those together because you can't sign guys for those positions or trade for those guys at those positions and play the kids because somebody's sitting on the bench. So I see it in many other ways. And again, I wasn't optimistic about this offseason. I thought Yamamoto was really in play. Obviously, it turned out to be. I never really felt like Ohtani was an option, even though it would have been funny if, Cohen would have came out of nowhere with a crazy offer, even though he knew Ohtani was never going to come here. But the funny thing that I see is the fact that we're talking about pitchers and players on the free agent market that hasn't signed anywhere yet. So we don't know. I think the next move next signing that the Mets make is going to be telling. Like, not minus the bullpen arms. If it's Matt Moore or Brent Suter or somebody else, I don't think that is telling, except they're just trying to get some bullpen arms in here to help out the bullpen. But if the next move is signing Imanaga, well, are they really punting on 2024? Because that's a move that's kind of like in the middle. Right? It's not Yamamoto. It's not Snell. It's kind of in between that. And I don't really know what they're trying to do because if this team goes into the season, like you said, with Imanaga and Lucas Giolito on their rotation, can that be a bad rotation? Because every one of our pitchers last year had a near 5 ERA, if not worse, except for Verlander. So, or besides Senga, excuse me. So if it comes out that that's the two guys they go after, how can you say it's a bad rotation? Is it a star-studded rotation? No. But again, I keep on going back to the teams that were in the playoffs, teams that were in the World Series. They weren't a star-studded rotation. Like the Rangers didn't have a star-studded rotation. Did anybody believe that Nathan Eovaldi is an ace pitcher? No. You could see him as a solid number 3. Montgomery, solid number 3. Right? They signed Jacob deGrom to be their ace, and he was there basically throughout the entire season. So I continue to see it like this, Chris. The first move starting pitching wise that is notable, that the names you mentioned, you talked about Mike Clevenger as well. Like you said, Clevenger had a little over a 3.5 ERA. Was that about right?
Yeah, around 3.77, I believe, last time I checked.
So 3.77 is better than every other pitcher besides Senga last year. Now, that's not saying much, but I always say it like this. people were talking about Wheeler in the chat just now. Wheeler had a 3.5 ERA this year, and he was the ace of the staff. Nobody had a better ERA on the Phillies. So why were the Phillies good? Right? The offense was good, but they didn't score that many runs more than the Mets per game. It wasn't much more. So it came down to the pitching. So if the Phillies had all their pitchers that had a 3.5 ERA or higher, if the Mets had that, you don't think they can be better than the 75 win team they were last year? Again, the Mets won 75 games, 6 games under 500 with no pitching staff the entire season. They would never hold the entire season. If you have a healthy rotation, there's a pretty good chance you could be a 500 team just by having a healthy rotation, because you get somebody every fifth day that you have in a rotation on a constant basis. I don't know about you, Chris, but healthy rotations matter, right? It's the reason why you think the Yankees were 1 game over 500. They had Cole and nobody else. They were completely injured. Yeah, they didn't have Judge, but their rotation was in shambles. Look at a lot of teams that were in shambles. The Rangers, who were running away with the AL West, had a ton of injuries in their rotation, lost the division, made a couple of deals at the deadline, and things changed. And a lot of people could say that the Arizona Diamondbacks probably had a better rotation than most teams. Look at what they did in the playoffs. So I see that this, a healthy rotation is a consistent rotation, in my opinion. I'm not saying that every one of them is going to have a 3.5 ERA, but if they have to a low 4 ERA, a couple of them, you're probably going to win more games than you're not. Because there was how many times last year we talked about it during our roundtables during the season. The Mets were giving up 6 runs in the first 3 innings, and then you had to have our team, our offense come back and win those games, which is hard to, especially with a bullpen that didn't have Diaz. So, Chris, I don't know how you see it, but healthy rotations, no matter which the Phillies were, but their best pitcher had a 3.45 ERA, which was Wheeler, and he was their ace. So I don't know what you think about it, but what do you think about having a healthy rotation can probably get you started in the right direction to start?
Yeah, I mean, you need to have these guys, and that's the problem, right, with the New York Mets, and that's been the problem with the New York Mets, especially over the last couple of seasons, is the health of this rotation, because then you put strains on other parts of your roster, right? You put strains on the bullpen at that point, especially when you have Tyler McGill, who really is at this point has no position. He's not going to be in a starting rotation. We don't even know if he's going to crack the bullpen, right? So I definitely agree with you. And that's one thing that I am concerned about going into 2024 as well. If they can stay healthy, even though it's Luis Severino, a down year in 2023, or Lucas Giolito, a down year in 2023, those guys stay healthy and are able to replicate at least close to a 3.5, maybe even a 4 ERA. I get it from an optics standpoint, that looks pretty bad. But if there's any sort of consistency, the Mets will be right there in the thick of things for the wild card. Now, I say wild card because I truly believe this team has no chance of winning the division. I truly believe that. So, and I think that's what has fans upset within itself. Like, we're settling for a wild card in 2024 when we can be going and adding and bolstering to compete with the Braves and the Phillies. I get that point. But that's why I'm not convinced that they're truly punting on 2024, because you can still remain competitive. And your own definition of competitive is whatever you decide, right? Which whatever you want it to be, right? It's per your own definition. But I truly believe if you have Sango, you bring in a Giolito, and then you fill out the rest of the rotation with Quintana, he stays healthy. I think it's decent. Like, it's playable, right? That plays, that sticks. But that's my concern, though. If you bring in a Hyun-Jin Ryu, like I believe Drifter was saying here, who only threw 50 innings last season, and you couple that with Luis Severino and his sample size over the last couple seasons, we know that he's not pitching bulk innings. Then that's counterproductive to the point that you just made, right? That's something that doesn't play. And if you're going to sign those lower tier guys, you got to have them pitch. They have to be eating innings.
Correct.
So that's why I want to pass on Hyun-Jin Ryu. Give me someone who's going to pitch 120, 130 innings in a season. I don't want someone who's going to pitch 80, 90 innings. That doesn't do me any good, right? So, like I said, and that's why you need that early bullpen depth that the Mets have been slowly stockpiling. That's exactly why. They probably know in their minds they're not going to be signing the top of the rotation guys. That's why they're stockpiling assets upon assets upon assets that prove as depth to come in on any given day and get called up from AAA Syracuse and appear in a crucial situation. And maybe that's a bad strategy. Who knows? Only time will tell.
Correct.
But I really think
Absolutely.
that and I think if we're looking at, like I said, it's time to start tempering expectations. If we're really looking at this season to be someone where we compete for or somewhere where we compete for the division, you're getting your hopes up. And I've already accepted that fact, and I think everybody should too. I'm not even sure anybody in the chat still believes that we'll win this division. So
No, I mean,
the Mets
nobody's
don't need to
bringing
win a
it. I
division.
mean, me and you are not bringing it up. I don't believe Nelson or Hayden are bringing it up at any moment.
No.
And nobody's saying that. And again, I do my projections every year, Chris, and I don't
Mm.
put a team that did not win the division in the Mets or the Phillies and say they're going to take over the division and win the division when they haven't done it in the last couple of years. I give the Braves the pedestal right there because it's just a sign of respect. But I mean, we keep on going back to the same thing, in the chat, us in general, and we know that it's not going to be a star-studded offseason. And we always understood that, but that doesn't mean you can't make your team better. And if this team is better roster-wise than they were in 2023 or 2022 or 2023, excuse me, then why can't they be better? And again, somebody brought up in the chat, but bad innings aren't good. Good innings aren't, having a guy that pitches innings. If they're not good innings, then what's the point? Well, in the Mets case, they had guys that weren't good and didn't give you innings. The fact of the matter is, our bullpen was shot by May. That's a problem. And again, Lucas Giolito, I'm looking at it right now. Prior to him getting traded to the Angels, he had a 3.79 ERA. 3.79 ERA in a team that was absolutely in a terrible situation in the White Sox. They were a toxic clubhouse. They didn't know their ass from their elbow. And he had a 3.79 ERA. And he pitched 28 games. Excuse me, actually, was it 28 games? Let's see. 33 games he pitched. So he pitches every fifth day, which is something that the Mets didn't have a lot of last year. And again, if you have a couple of guys, if you get Senga that can pitch to an under 3 ERA like he did last year, and other guys that are 3.5 ERA or a little bit higher, a little over a 4, it's better. And they give you quality innings. Again, I just went over the Phillies. The Phillies had nobody in their rotation that had under a 3.45 ERA, and that was Wheeler. And the Phillies did not score that many more runs per game than the Mets. That's how minuscule it was. That if the Mets had a starter go 6 innings between April and the middle of May, because there wasn't one starter that went more than 6 innings at any moment for the first month and a half until the middle of May, it hurt your bullpen, and the starting was a disaster with Verlander being out a month and a half, with Scherzer getting suspended and being injured. And then you had other guys get injured. And then you have Peterson and McGill, who were saviors in 22, were debacle in 23. That's why the depth matters as well. The fact of the matter is, if you don't think that a team like the Mets can have similar pitching than the Phillies, that wasn't very good starting pitching wise, then why can't it actually happen to the Mets? It's so different from year to year, right? The Mets won 101 games and then they won 75 games. Why was that? If you go back to it, they scored a very similar amount of runs in 22 than in 23. It didn't look like that, but they did. The pitching was the difference. It's just that simple. They had a very good rotation and a solid bullpen. They can do that this offseason without signing Montgomery or Snell. They could do that. Like I said, you said Imanaga, Lucas Giolito. Say if it's Giolito and Clevenger, Giolito or Bauer, or Bauer and Clevenger. It's already better than what the Mets had because these guys weren't healthy. This rotation was never whole. And you saw what happened when Quintana came back. It calmed down the rotation. It made a hectic rotation calm down a little bit because it was volatile the entire year. Only when Quintana came back and he pitched to a 3.6, 3.7 ERA, it slowed everything else down. You know why? because you knew every fifth day that guy was going there. When you can trust a guy going out there every fifth day, you have a chance to win. Because if he throws 6 innings, 3 or 4 runs, you can win ball games like that. You can't win ball games when your starter gets knocked out in the third inning and gives up 6 runs. And the Mets did that a ton last year. And Chris, and I think that's the biggest problem. You need too many people think you just need a start-starter rotation, which the Mets had 2 years in a row, and it burned them 2 years in a row. And teams with the best rotations haven't been winning. It comes down to solid pitching during the season and clutch pitching at the right time, along with a decent bullpen and your guys hitting. And again, everybody can check the stats if you want with the offense. The New York Mets scored similar runs per game than they did in 2022. So what was the difference, Chris? It was pitching. And I think that's what we've been clamoring for a while on our channels, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're making all the points here. It's really, I was going to say, it's just difficult to sort of agree on. I mean, everyone's not going to agree on it. I've said this before. But I saw someone in the chat over here say that, everybody who came into this offseason with sort of those above and beyond expectations weren't really listening to Steve Cohen. And that's something that I respect out of Steve Cohen and David Stearns. They've kept it real with us for a long time now. They absolutely have. So I agree with you. And Carlos has also spin facts in the chat here. Talking about a retool year. Everybody has their own definitions of a retool year. But yeah, absolutely. Good pitching, good bullpen. You don't go in and you don't go into the season and have a bullpen like the Mets did last season in the front end, right? With your Steven Nagosics or your Drew Smiths. Although Drew Smith is probably going to be sticking around in 2024. But that's just not really a recipe for success, right? Yeah. So, like I said, it is what it is on the pitching front. We know exactly what we're going to get from the Mets. If history repeats itself for the last couple of months and what we've been seeing in this offseason, it's going to be those short-term deals.
Yep.
And the last point that I wanted to make is on my podcast episode before, the reason we can start deducing that is if everybody in the chat doesn't subscribe to Subway to Shea, you should. He went live with Will Salmon, who covers the Mets for The Athletic, and I asked about Shota Imanaga, and what I got was a quote saying everything in his reporting so far has led him to believe the Mets are not in on guys that are going to cost more than 1 to 2 years. In any category. And that also includes DH, right? So when you think about Teoscar Hernandez, I know we're getting away from the pitching now and getting into the hitting, but that includes Teoscar on your screen. That could exclude Jorge Soler, depending on what his market is. So, like I said, 1 to 2 year deals are fine. And the point that I want to drive home and make sure everybody understands is that it's about flexibility. When you have a top five farm system and you have a pretty stacked selection of guys in AA coming up, like you said in your previous point at the top of this podcast, at the top of this stream, if you're one to say you want to see the kids come up, there has to be an inkling of patience. Now, are all those kids in the minor leagues going to be coming up to the New York Mets without any trades happening? No, because I do think, and we've been saying this for a while, we do think that the Mets are going to make trades. Because we can talk about free agency until we're blue in the face. The Mets are not out on any trades, excluding trading prospects for a rental. Controllable contracts are still out there to be had.
Yes.
So if everybody's given up on the offseason, that's how you can view it, absolutely, in terms of the free agent standpoint. But if there are trades to be made, there are great names to sort of go after and target.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you brought it up, like you just pivoted right to the DH market that we were just going to lean into, and good job by you doing that. Yeah. When it comes to the DH, that's why Turner and Martinez makes the most sense for the Mets, because they solve a problem that the Mets have. That's DH. Just looking at the DH spot, that's why Turner and Martinez that are probably not going to get more than 2 years. If they do, the Mets are out, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to get a 2-year deal at most for either one of them, and that's why I like Turner a little bit more than Martinez, only because he can play third base. Turner, just in case Beatty does not pan out, and I don't believe Vientos is good enough at third base where the Mets are going to be willing to keep him there. You got to be careful when it comes in. I think that's why Turner with the 2 year. I'd rather go Turner 2 year deal than JD Martinez 2 year deal just because of that. But yeah, and look, and you brought a great point. It's not just about the free agent market. There is a trade market out there. And again, it might be another third starter that we're not, the Chris Bassett signing a couple of years ago. Where did that come from? Nobody heard about that until it happened. That was a solid trade. It was a better trade than most people thought was going to be the case. I mean, Bassett was our most consistent starter in 2022, and he held it down when DeGrom and Scherzer were out. And the Mets can make a move like that. Look around the league. Look, we keep on talking about Dylan Cease. I'm not saying the Mets are going to get Dylan Cease, but you don't think David Stearns is on the horn talking to the White Sox about Dylan Cease? Why not? He has 2 years left on his deal. He's not a rental, right? And I still believe this. I still think that if the Milwaukee Brewers are willing to trade Corbin Burns, I would not be shocked if Stearns is willing to trade prospects for him, even though he's a rental, because he knows Burns. He knows the situation in Milwaukee. Burns was willing to sign an extension with the Brewers. And that was with a front office he just had a lot of problems with. So I think Stearns knows him enough where he can trust the fact and have a conversation with Burns. Say, listen, if we trade for you, we're going to talk extension here. That's an option. And look, there's your ace in the hole, even though I talked about Bauer being the ace in the hole in my video. And by the way, for the people in the chat, no, it wasn't for clicks. It was the fact that Bauer's probably going to get a 1 or 2 year deal, which Chris and most of us have been talking about. Pitchers that are going to get or looking to get 1 or 2 year deals is where the Mets are looking to go. Bauer's not getting more than a 2 year deal. He'll probably get a 2 year deal with the second year being a player option. So if he has a good first year, he can go back on the market and make more money. So that's why Bauer, I did that video, because it was more about the 1 and 2 year deal options the Mets are looking at and not the long-term deals. And I think that's the most important thing, Chris, that you brought up, is that not just the trade market, but the 1 or 2 year deals on the free agent market for pitchers has to involve Trevor Bauer, because Trevor Bauer is going to get signed by a Major League team. Somebody, even if it's the Pirates or somebody like that. The fact of the matter is, if the Mets are going to be in a transition year, which everybody loves to talk about, and think it's going to be a 70-win team, well, why not bring in Bauer? If he has a good hit first half, you can trade him for another prospect or two, right? I mean, that's an option. If you already think the season's over, for most people in the chat, they think the season's going over, but yet they'll be the first ones cheering them on if they're in the hunt at the deadline, right? Because that's the other aspect of this. The assets that we have in prospects, if the Mets hang around in the first half of the season and they're within striking distance of a playoff spot, they're going to make trades at the deadline. They're not going to just pass up and off a season like that. I tell you that right now, because the Mets had no hope in 2023. We knew it. Everybody was saying, oh, you can't trade these guys. We're not too far off. And technically we weren't, but you didn't know that in August 1st, right? We didn't know that, right? What happened with an 84-win team being the third wildcard team. You don't know that at the time, right? And there was no inkling that this team was going to turn it around because they showed no signs of it. So let's get back into the DH situation. Who do you want to, or at least the possible DH that can be a platoon guy at third, or just in general? Turner, Martinez. You talked about Teoscar, who's probably going to get a multi-year deal. And I'd even put Soler there because I think he's going to get a 4-year deal from somebody, and that's out of the question for the Mets. Who would you want, Turner or Martinez? Because that seems like where the Mets are going to go.
Yeah, I think we had this discussion last time around. I think it's Justin Turner, to be honest with you. I know he doesn't provide as much power as JD Martinez. I don't think JD Martinez is going to hit 33 home runs like he did last season for the Dodgers. It's not going to happen. I have been a very big fan of the type of hitter that Justin Turner has become ever since, he went to the Dodgers and has been a Dodger up until last season. He's an all fields hitter. And I'm not even taking into his account the defensive side of the ball here and his versatility on the defensive side. That doesn't really even matter to me anymore. If he's a DH, he's a DH. I mean, at that point, does it help that he can play first base behind Pete Alonso if he needs a day off? Sure, it does. Does it help that he can play second base? Yeah, of course. Does it help that he can play third base if something happens to Brett Beatty or he's not performing well? Of course. That's the obvious. But he's an all fields hitter. He'll get you 20 to 23, 4, maybe 5 home runs, just depends. But like I said, I love the thing that the Mets have been struggling with. I feel like, especially when the guys like Pete Alonso get into these slumps. And I think this is an underrated topic that not many people talk about. Having played baseball for a number of years, Rob, I know you played as well. Really, when you feel like you're on top of your game as a hitter, you're hitting the ball the opposite way.
Yep.
And that's something I feel like the Mets, Michael Conforto did it really well when he first came up. And then he started to get home run happy, which was great because he was putting the ball out of the yard. But a lefty for Michael Conforto hit the ball the opposite way was a treasure. Yep. Pete Alonso, same thing from the right side, has tremendous opposite field power. But when he gets into those slumps, you see him rolling over that outside pitch and not simply taking the ball the other way. Now, it's harder said than done. Absolutely. But Justin Turner has been doing this for a very long time. And I'm not saying JD Martinez hasn't, but when I look at the pure swing of both of those guys, I like the way Justin Turner sets himself up for success in terms of that oppo power. Now, like I said, if the Mets go sign JD Martinez, am I going to be angry? No, this is someone that the Mets wanted last season, right? Before he went to the Dodgers. And he would have played really well for the Dodgers or for the Mets last season behind Pete Alonso with those 33 home runs. But you know what I mean? Like, I have my reasons and I do my due diligence in terms of watching not only what these guys' statistics are, but also just looking at their swing in general. And I highly encourage everybody to do that as well, because that is also important. And Citi Field, right? I mean, I guess you can say it's sort of on the fence, whether it's a friendly pitcher's ballpark or a friendly hitter's ballpark, right? But yeah, I like myself some opposite field hitting, and that's the reason why I take Justin Turner. But his flexibility on the defensive side of the ball helps as well. He's not going to be playing any sort of third base for, above 15, 20 games. That's just simply not what his legs are capable of anymore. He's 39 years old. If anything, if he's playing in the field extensively, he'll be playing first base behind Pete Alonso. They can platoon at DH if that's necessary. But what I will say, though, is that contract situation is very tricky because he's coming off of a decent year, right? And he's 39 years old, but you have to think he wants to maximize his value while he still can. So maybe he is pushing for a 2-year deal. And whether the deal breaker for him or the Mets is what kind of option he gets after that first year, something that remains to be seen. But remember when the Mets were in heavy talks with Michael A. Taylor, we saw that news coming out of nowhere and everything just went dead silent on the Michael A. Taylor front. And the Mets ended up pivoting to Tyrone Taylor, presumably, for that fourth outfield type role. We saw Justin Turner and that news come out, what was it, a week and a half ago? And everything's been quiet ever since then. That's strange to me. That's strange to me.
So I think I know which. I think the light bulb went off. You think they're looking at a trade for a bat?
That's what I would assume. I just don't know where they would start in that category. I don't know.
I was trying to look honestly because I was thinking of that earlier today, and I was like searching rosters and thinking like, who do the Mets can trade for that's a decent bat? I don't know who. I looked at Kyle Schwarber. Like that's what I saw. That was probably obvious, but the Phillies ain't trading him, especially to the Mets. So like I don't know. Again, nobody really looked at Hauser and Taylor. When that happened, and that was during the Michael A. Taylor conversations as well. And again, I don't know why the Justin Turner rumors got really quiet. I don't know if it was the holidays or what, but it went dead silent, like you just said. And that was a great point you brought up. It just brought up what I was doing earlier today while I was basically sitting home and playing fetch with my cat. Yeah, my cat fetches for some reason. So I it's interesting to think because when it goes silent like that, it seems like they're cooking up something. Again, we could both be completely wrong, but it seemed like that's what happened with the Michael A. Taylor thing, and if they turned it into a back end rotation guy and an outfield bench piece that could play all three outfield positions. So, speaking of outfield, Left field seems to not be talked about enough with the Mets. We hear about DH, we hear about pitching, bullpen, and starting pitching. What the hell are they doing with with left field? Right? We know it's not going to be Bellinger. We all know that. Drew Gilbert might be the option, and I said this earlier when the Mets traded for him that he was a possibility of getting a chance to win this left field job in spring training. I think that's going to be the case. I think Drew Gilbert's going to get a very good shot of making a team, jumping to Double-A in the major leagues. And I have no problem with that, because if you're going to give 3-4 years to a Soler who's not a very good defender but good bat, or anybody else that I could see on the market, I'm not giving 7 years to Bellinger, $200+ million. So if you tell me Drew Gilbert's your starting left fielder and he earns it, because last year was a joke with the Mets. The people who earned it in spring training didn't get the job. Brett Baty earned to be the third baseman starting the year, the way he was playing in spring training. Even though he didn't have a good year, he deserved, and I think that probably took a little bit of the fire out of him, to be honest with you. Because when I was in spring training, he was better than Mauricio, and he was just playing great defensively and offensively when I was there. I have no problem if the Mets say, Drew, it's your job to lose. If he loses it in spring training, so be it. But I give Drew Gilbert the job, honestly. I like his bat. He's got some sneaky power, and he's a very good defender. He could play center field. He could play right field. He could play left field. The Mets would use him in left field. But what do you think about Drew Gilbert? Do you think he should get the opportunity to win the left field job?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because Drew Gilbert didn't get added to the 40-man roster as of yet, and I saw that. And that's something key from the Shane Sons podcast. Also, I just checked right now if they updated him, and he's not on the 40-man roster. Alex Ramirez is there. Yeah, there you go. You see? We're on the same page here. So as much as I would love to see Drew Gilbert, I mean, he hit what, 325 in 35 games when he went to Double-A Binghamton. I mean, he had a slow start to the season when he was still in the Astros organization, but he absolutely killed it ever since, coming over to the Mets organization, that farm system. And maybe a change of scenery definitely is something that he needed, but he's not on a 40-man roster. So I'm not entirely sure we'll even see him in spring training. So take that for what it's worth. But I would like to let the chat know the 40-man roster as we see it right now, I believe there's only 38 spots filled to that 40-man roster, is not the same 38 spots that you might see next month. There will be additions and there will be subtractions by default. So I just would like to make that point. But in terms of Drew Gilbert, shout out Carlos in the chat. And he joins me in being one of the biggest Drew Gilbert fans. That is my favorite prospect in the Mets farm system. I truly believe he has the capability of a 5-tool player. Elite defense, great arm, great power, right? When he chooses to display that, and the speed is there. Absolutely. So I really think that the Mets have something special in Drew Gilbert. And I just don't know how they view him in terms of the readiness aspect. And I think that's another thing that we should talk about when we talk about these prospects is, what are the Mets going to do in this season coming up, and also seasons in the future, right? In 2025 and beyond, do the Mets view Triple-A the same? Having what happened with Mark Vientos, having what happened with Brett Baty, do they still view Triple-A the same? Or are they going to start to bypass Triple-A and send up guys right from Double-A, a la Michael Conforto years ago?
Perfect pivot to that, because David Stearns, I looked at it. I wrote it down right here. David Stearns, in his last 3 seasons as GM, brought up 6 players from Double-A to skip Triple-A. And again, a couple of them were pitchers, and there was 2. I didn't write their names down, but I saw 6 players from Double-A they brought up from Double-A to the majors. 4 pitchers and 2 position players. And the interesting thing about that is that's why Stearns is important here, because Stearns is the guy that is in this new age type of thinking where AAA is for the has-beens, or for the guys who are never going to make the majors, that are just hanging around for dear life, and guys that are going through rehabs. That's what AAA is for now. AA is where the best players are, the best prospects. It's rare now that they go to AA to AAA, play there for a season, and if they look good early on, they'll bring them up. No, it's not like that no more. It's AA and get your ass up here. And that's why I think, like you said, the 40-man roster is probably going to change a little bit. Couple of guys that might get released, couple of guys that might get traded. You never know. I think you're going to find Gilbert by the time the 40-man has to be situated by spring training. I think Gilbert's going to be on the 40-man, right? Is Acuna on the 40-man? I think I saw that, right? Or he's not yet.
I didn't look at the infielders.
Shit, I just had his name. But say if he is, because I think Acuna is another one that might actually.
He is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
I saw his name. I just couldn't find him again. Freaking list.
Well, Ronnie Mauricio is still on the 40-man too. So from what I'm seeing, so he's going to be taken.
If he goes to the 60 day,
right?
He's off the 40-man. Yeah. So there you go. So it's technically 37 on the 40-man right now. So yeah, I do think Gilbert's going to get a chance. But again, we'll see what the Mets do. If the Mets do miraculously pivot to Bellinger, well, then we have our answer. But if it ain't Bellinger, I don't see anybody else out there. I know people keep on talking about Teoscar Hernandez. That's not happening. They're not doing that. If they really like their prospects in Gilbert, Acuna, Clifford, Ramirez, it's a lot of outfield prospects there. And where are you going to play more? You ain't going to sign Bellinger and Teoscar Hernandez. It doesn't make sense. So I think that's the case that we're at right now. So, Chris, I want to, we're getting a little bit into this a little bit more since the holiday. Christmas is over. We heard about, he's hearing about the link to the bullpen arms. What do you think is the next move the Mets are going to make, minus the bullpen moves? If you had to say by New Year, it's only about 5 days away. Do you think the Mets sign, trade, acquire a player that you think is going to happen in the next 5-6 days or so? Say in the time frame of the next week or two.
Yeah, I put this poll up too in terms of whether people thought on our Interstate Mets account. If you don't follow us, it's at Interstate Mets. I put the poll up, asking the Mets fans that follow us whether we're going to make a trade next or whether we're going to sign a free agent next and what they thought. I was pondering on this for a little bit. I really was, because I was like, we're talking about trades. I do think a trade is coming, but what's the next immediate move? And we got onto this discussion of Justin Turner here. And I know I made the point, and it was a food for thought type of point, comparing the Michael A. Taylor talks going quiet versus the Justin Turner talks and how that might be signifying a trade here soon. But I really do think the Mets bring back Justin Turner. I really do think so. If I had to put what the very next move would be outside of those depth bullpen moves that the Mets have been making steadily all offseason, to those 2-way contracts and minor league type contracts that we just saw with Chad Smith a couple days ago, I really do think it's Justin Turner. I think it'll be a 2-year deal. And Carlos said in the chat too, shout out Carlos. Giving Justin Turner a 2-year deal, even at the age of 39, does not worry me whatsoever.
No,
not at all. With the type of hitter he is, and I see Williams saying sign him for 1 year only, which is probably in the ideal world what you'd probably want to do.
You're not going to get him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Someone's going to give him 2 years, right? So if that's the case, then so be it. He'll have a bulk of a workload that's really heavy in 2024, and then he'll be a bench bat, presumably, if the Mets go nuclear in 2025. In terms of the offseason, you'll have a nice, solid bench bat there in Justin Turner sitting for you.
He's an afterthought at that point in 25.
Exactly. So that's why I'm okay with signing a 39-year-old to 2 years, because you just need him for this season to stay healthy and be that DH. You don't even need to. He doesn't need to play defense. He just needs to be the DH. And then in 2025, when you shore up more of that roster with those long-term deals that we're all expecting, he goes to the bench. And he becomes one of the best bench bats probably in the league, even at the age of 40. So I completely agree here, MEZ. I understand the point. I understand the worry. It depends on the AAV. But if it's reasonable, 2 years for Justin Turner, really, it doesn't bother me. So I think it's Justin Turner, is to answer your question.
Yeah. And, like I just said, it's if 2025 is what everybody expects it to be in the offseason, going after Soto, going after this guy or that guy, whatever you want to talk about, and that's where the Mets are really going to make their move, then Justin Turner on his last year of his deal, like you said, he's going to be a bench guy, a guy who can probably still DH, but is probably the best bat off the bench. and he would be an afterthought. So 2 years is not really looking into 2025. You're looking at him for 2024. And if you have to get him, you get him. You give him that extra year. I have no problem with that. And I saw that poll. That's why I brought that up, because I thought it would be right up the alley of what you wanted to talk, what you were really going in on your interstate report. Exactly what you were talking about, because I still think and we've been in agreement on this. We think the Mets are going to make a trade somewhere, and I don't think the Hauser trade, the Taylor trade, was the trade that we were talking about. I'm talking about a trade that is more suitable, more better than the Hauser trade, which was a solid trade for basically nothing. And again, if Stearns can make those type of deals where he can get away with giving a guy who had Tommy John for two pieces that can help this roster this year and beyond, or at least Tyron Taylor could, I think Stearns is going to make a trade, because I think that's going to be his best move. Because if there is a situation or an alternate reality where Turner wants 3 years and Martinez wants 3 years or 2 years with a third-year option, the Mets are going to do that. And Stearns is going to have to look elsewhere, and there ain't that much out there except overpaying for somebody. So he might have to look for a trade to be his best bet. And if he can fleece the Brewers in giving two players for a Tommy John prospect, hey, keep on going. But yeah, I do think that the fact that the Mets, I think Justin Turner is going to happen. I think you're going to hear it since it's the day after Christmas. You know, you heard the broken arms right away. I think you're going to hear a little bit more rumblings towards Justin Turner. So I think we're in agreement on the Justin Turner front. And hey, Martinez or Turner, I can't complain about either one. But I really think Turner coming back to New York, I think is perfect. I think that he would have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder that the Wilpons screwed him when he was a Met, because nobody thought he was going to turn out to what he did in LA. But we all had an inkling that he might be a good player. The Wilpons didn't like him because they didn't want to give him $1 million compared to his $850,000 arbitration number. And the Wilpons didn't like his attitude either. So if that's two things that was worrisome about them, then you wonder why people talk about Cohen and the Wilpons being Wilpons 2.0 is hilarious, because they bitched and moaned about $250,000 on a player that could have been an all-star for the Mets. He might have not played third base because of right, but could have played second, could have played first.
Yeah.
So, Chris, final thoughts with the Mets. If you want to bring anything else up, go right ahead. You got the floor, buddy.
No, like I say, I see Anthony and William in the chat. I believe it was William, but Anthony for sure saying 2 years, 20 million for Justin Turner. I believe they're saying. So let's see here, 2 years, 20 million. He was making 6.7 with the Boston Red Sox last season. If he probably does make more than 10 million a year, I would assume, right? Because these are probably
10 million per year. That would be a steal.
I was gonna say, if you show me the dotted line on 2 years, $20 million for Justin Turner, I'm signing that immediately. But I think he does get a couple extra $1 million, from whoever he signs with, given that this is probably his last contract of his career, right? So absolutely. Nothing really pressing that I really wanted to talk about outside of that. Like I said, just noticed the sort of situation we have in terms of the bullpen, the pitchers that this Mets team is trying to prioritize. Temper your expectations. We're not going after these huge contract type deals. Montgomery is not a pivot point at this point from what we know. Snell's not a pivot point up to right now for what we know. I would love Imanaga to be a pivot point, but when you see all the other teams striking out on Yamamoto, like, you're going to have to also outbid those teams for Imanaga. And the Mets can, absolutely. But if the Mets already weren't going to plan to sign those guys, right, Montgomery and Snell, to 6 to 7 year deals, and they don't have that in their minds, they're surely not going to go after a guy that wants a longer term contract when you have to outbid other teams for that contract. That's counterintuitive to what this whole offseason is about. So, like I said, great stream. I appreciate everyone in the chat. It was a great discussion here. We're talking a lot of hypotheticals here, right? We're talking about situations that might happen or that could happen and where we see fit in terms of what the best route is for this team to go forward. But like we all know, And like you said with the Chris Bassett trade, right? Like we saw with the Brooks Raley trade last offseason, these things come out of absolute nowhere. So a lot of people panicking and saying, oh, the Mets, we haven't heard anything about the Mets. We haven't heard anything about the Mets. You're not going to hear anything about the New York Mets until it happens. I promise you. Yep. And that's why I urge people not to listen to these reporters sometimes or these journalists, right? I mean, really, the best journalists to listen to is the ones that strictly cover the Mets. The ones that strictly cover the Mets, because they might have a little bit more knowledge and insider information than the guy like John Heyman, right? So pay attention to who you listen to. That was very evident in the Yoshinobu Yamamoto sweepstakes. Continue to sort of take that approach here as we move along in the offseason, but temper your expectations first and foremost. Subscribe to both of our channels, like I said, and like we've been saying here all this time. Subscribe to both channels. Rob's, if you haven't already, and mine as well at CPNY Sports, True Mets Talk Podcast, Interstate Mets Report. I'm on this Hot Stove Live, the Mets Roundtable, all the time. Mets content 24/7 every single week. More often than not, you're going to see our faces on the screen going live. So if you want to know what the latest and greatest Mets news is and content, subscribe to the channels. Hit that thumbs up primarily as well. And like I said, good stream, man. Until the next one.
Absolutely. And that is Chris from CP New York Sports Network. Subscribe to his channel. He does the Knicks. He does the Rangers. He does the Giants. He does the Mets, of course. And make sure you hit those thumbs up on both channels. Don't forget. And again, we're going to keep on doing these hot stoves until the end of the offseason. And then we pivot right into the Roundtable podcast every Monday. And we'll go over the week of games with Nelson and Hayden and Chris and myself. So once the season starts, we will get that back together as well and get the band back together consistently. Again, with the offseason, we all got our own shows. We all got a lot of work to do. It's hard to come on together every single time. We got a ton of content we got to put out there for you guys. And remember, guys, we are not reported. We are given our opinions. That's what we have to say to people sometimes, because I don't know if you've been getting comments, but I've been getting comments. Why are you reporting? I'm not reporting. I promise you that. It's my opinion. It's the first 5 words I say in my video about this is what I believe they should do or where they should pivot to. We're giving our opinions, not reporting. All right. Even though journalism now is apparently opinions instead of reporting. And Joel, no, Martino is not a Mets reporter. He is a New York beat reporter, right? Or you could just say a Yankee show, whatever you want to do with that. So, Chris, I appreciate you tuning in, coming on to Hot Stove with me and hanging out, talking Mets. Everybody in the chat, great job by you guys. Another Hot Stove in the books. CP New York Sports, that's where you find Chris, TMWRNYM. You find both of us on Twitter with those handles. With that said, guys, Chris, have a great night. As always, Met fans, let's go Mets. Have a great night, guys. See you next time.
Let's go Mets.
To meet the Mets! Oh, they're hollering, they're cheering, and they're jumping in their seats. Where do they go? To meet the Mets! All the fans are true to the orange and blue. So hurry up and come on down. 'Cause we got ourselves a ball club, the Mets of New York.